They're prescribed, you get them at a pharmacy. Typically, when a child or an adult or if somebody is first exposed, it's not from buying it on a street corner like you would perhaps cocaine or heroin, or buying it in a legal manner. The first exposure to prescription painkillers is typically out of a medicine chest, or Partnership for Drug-Free America did a survey that found the most common place they're kept is in the kitchen cabinet, right next to the kitchen sink. So it's just making people aware of how dangerous these are. I think that's the best thing that we can do at all ages. We've got a problem with prescription painkillers in the senior community and the youth community. It hits all ages. So making them aware of the dangers is critical.
And that takes us into the access to this kind of, different medications out there. A national drug survey was identified that 55% of these medications are coming from friends and relatives. 18% are being prescribed legally, 10% being purchased from friends, 5% are being stolen. You visiting somebody's house, you said you go to the restroom, oh, there's a medicine cabinet, let me open up, and oh, look what I got, pour it into the hand. Or even, 5% being done from the drug dealers and the strangers. And what kind of caught me in all of this was that, when you looked at those numbers, almost 70% of it is coming from our households, from wherever they are. You mentioned, locations that they're stored at and so forth. Alarming numbers, again, I think, communication, awareness to the parents, so.
Well, what triggered our most recent legislative effort was we wanted to see if we could do something on the side of prevention. And I've been to a couple of drug drop-off days where you can bring your unused prescriptions to a drug drop-off and they're disposed of properly. And after one of those, I was at a program where somebody at the program said we should start thinking differently. Maybe we should have 4 or 8 drug drop-off days a year rather than 2. And my first thought was, if we go from 2 to 8, that means we've got 4 times too many pills being prescribed. And it goes to your point that how they're being first accessed. Mm-hmm. Because there's so many of them out there. We all know the stories. You go, you hurt your shoulder, you have your wisdom teeth out, you maybe get 18 Vicodin, you use 2 or 3, now you've got 15 left. What do you do with them? They stay in a medicine chest because you paid for them. You think you may need them again. So what we wanted to do was to limit the unnecessary prescribing of these pills. And what we're requiring is physicians to continue with their educational process, which was part of the 2010 legislation. We're requiring them to enroll in the prescription monitoring program. We're requiring them to run a prescription monitoring screen when they prescribe a prescription painkiller for the first time to a patient. And we're requiring the use of tamper-resistant pads, prescription pads. So we have a lot of different components in the legislation that we think will result in fewer pills being in the home. And the other component of it is we're asking doctors, physicians, dentists to come together in a working group and to establish best practices. Emergency room physician treats pain differently than an oncologist, who treats pain differently than a dentist, who treats pain differently than an orthopedic. We're asking them to come together, develop best practices, and we'll turn those best practices into regulation. And it may mean that emergency room physicians agree that they will prescribe fewer pills on an emergency room visit. Or it may mean that primary care physicians will prescribe fewer, knowing that somebody's going to be referred to an orthopedic or an oncologist or whatever it may be. So they'll come together over 6 months, develop best practices, we'll turn them into regulation, and we think that will have a significant impact as well on the number of pills that are out there.
Okay. I want to take a moment to kind of step back and first of all thank you personally, the efforts of our local and state delegation here in the city of Brockton, our local politicians, particularly school committee member Bill Carpenter, in relationship to the let me not forget the North River Collaborative, right, coming together and bringing a high school here to the Brockton to address the drug addiction issue here in the South Shore.
A lot of people did a lot of great work on that, and it's something that's really needed. Think of it if you've developed an addiction and your surroundings are your classmates, and you are fortunate enough to recognize the need for treatment, and you go into a treatment program, and now you're ready to be released. You're looking at going back to that same community, that same small group perhaps, that fostered or enabled the addiction. So the Recovery High School gives you an opportunity to step away from it. and continue with your education. They have a program that will allow you to go to Massasoit Community College as well. So it's a great program. A lot of people did some great work on it, and I think it's really going to be a success here.
I know we kicked it off in mid-December here, and I know they had some open houses there recently, and, I really think that, your efforts and all of our, representatives and senators out there have done a tremendous job in bringing that to the South Shore where it's greatly needed, and I just want to, again, thank you very much for your efforts behind there. A recent survey from partners of drugfree.org identified that 56% of parents say their kids have easy access to these pain pills. You had mentioned it earlier, the kitchen cabinet. 36% of these kids are getting these pills from the kitchen cabinet. 31% out of the bathrooms, when you go in. And 26% keep them right on their bedside table, from that perspective. What was strikingly interesting was that a surprising 14% of parents surveyed have given these pain pills to their children without consulting a doctor. What are we doing out there?
And I think it goes to lack of education. Again,
Yep.
You get them by prescription, you get them at a drugstore, they're not illegal, they must be safe. And I think we have to educate parents, all age groups, as to how dangerous these are. We toyed with a few different things when we were developing the most recent piece of legislation. One was, would we have some sort of a mandatory program in the schools? Maybe we have it so that somebody doesn't go from middle school to high school unless their parents have attended one of these programs. And, it just gets very cumbersome trying to figure out the best way to do it. So the legislation that just passed the Senate has a provision in it that when a prescription painkiller is filled at a pharmacy, stapled onto the package will be a very clear, concise piece of information that will tell people how dangerous these drugs are, what the signs of addiction and dependency are, where you can get help if you notice the signs, and how to store the prescription properly and how to dispose of it properly. And it won't be when you open up a prescription now, you get all this little print and they have a chemical compound and everything else in there. It won't be that. It'll be clear, concise, educational, and hopefully that will make parents realize the next time they think about giving a painkiller to a child, they'll stop and say, you know what? I read that piece of information. I'll call my doctor before I do it.
Yep. And kind of as a follow-up to that kind of free access that we have out there, part of the bill talks about lock boxes. Pharmacy requiring lock boxes to be made available. How does that look?
That's been interesting. The 2010 legislation required lock boxes to be on shelves. The pharmacies reported to us as we were preparing the most recent piece of legislation that they weren't selling. And that it was costing them shelf space. So we said, we want you to staple this piece of information onto the prescriptions. We know that's going to take a little time, it's going to take a little effort. But what we also want you to do is make sure that you post at the pharmacy, at the counter, that lock boxes are available for sale. You can have them behind the counter, you can have them in a closet, but you have to post something informing people who are picking up prescriptions that the lock boxes are available. The sales of them have not been great, and I don't know how many pharmacies put them on the shelves. So we try to reach an agreement that we'll go for education, but you also have to post that these are available. You have to keep them on site so that they are available for people.
Constant theme of today's message: education, information, and staying forward. We've seen as part of that study too that with the return of our veterans from the wars that we've seen happen over the last decade, that many of our veterans are becoming addicted and potentially even being incarcerated. There was some wording in there about programs for jail diversion for the veterans. And quick.
Yes, we're trying to do as much jail diversion as possible, especially for veterans that are coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder, a whole host of issues from serving overseas. So anything that we can do, not to criminalize being addicted or dependent, but to get them the help that they need. They don a uniform, they fight for us, they come back. Unfortunately, they may be exposed to these painkillers once a year. I think we have an obligation to make sure that they get whatever treatment, recovery, education that we can possibly provide.
Okay. We probably have about 30 seconds left, and I just want to get in the Good Samaritan provision. Is that still there, and what does that really mean to a person who may or may not want to get involved if somebody is overdosing?
Right. It was in the sentencing reform legislation that passed the Senate. We also put it in our legislation that just passed relative to prescription painkiller diversion. It's in there. People shouldn't be afraid to pick up the phone and dial 911 when somebody that they're with is in an overdose situation. They will not be prosecuted. It's limited. Dealers will not be able to utilize this. They won't be able to take advantage of any loopholes. It's just there to save a life. And we hope it will pass through the legislation to be signed by the governor. And there's also a Narcan provision in the legislation that we passed that would hold police officers, firefighters, and others who administer Narcan harmless.
And we have some cities in the towns in South Shore that police are carrying Narcan now.
City of Quincy, where I live, is doing it. My brother's the police chief there. He's embraced the program. It's going
Excellent.
well.
Well, we're out of time, unfortunately. It's amazing how fast a half hour can go by on a topic of this nature. I want to again thank you for coming in and sharing with our viewers some updates as to what's happening within the state legislation and some of the programs that are available out there. Senator, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.